Okay, so now we're going to talk about how you do this. I just want to share a conversation that I had that gives an example of how exciting this can be. So Jana is a postdoc in the human sexuality program, and she works in the clinic there. And we were talking about how exciting it would be to apply social norms concepts to sexual behavior, because that's a part of life where you have no clue of the norm for your group or in general. So I was thinking, let's say I'm a graduate student and I'm having issues and I go to the clinic and I talk to her and she gives me information that shows me that I'm misperceiving the norm about, like, maybe I'm having problems in my relationship with my significant other and I think no one else has this and it's actually very common, and she gives me some good data and we talk about it. And then I go out and I go back to my department and there's a poster that says 95% of students in this program would respect someone if that person's professor was harassing them and they talked to a confidential person. Those are two mutually reinforcing interventions, even though one seems to have nothing to do with the other. By talking to her, I believe the poster more. I understand what the poster is telling me. This is why it's so exciting me here in particular to have the faculty involved with this, because there's so many ways you could talk about this within the academic setting that will empower and lift. You know, then when Gavin has everyone to fill out the cards about the fires in the bathroom, it's like they already know what he's talking about because they heard it in a social class or a social psych class or something. So that's what I'm talking about creating synergy. Okay. So the question is, do we have data about faculty-student relationships? First of all, let me say something unrelated to explain my behavior, which is because of the bright light for the camera, the people in this corner of the room are like a little obscured to me. So if it looks like I'm not noticing you, I have a good excuse. Okay. That's an area where we need to do research. There's now emerging really good research, including from a graduate student survey that's used on this campus, about the incidence and prevalence of abuse between faculty and students. And let's say, if you go back to yesterday, the bystander is notice the event, interpret it as a problem. We're starting now to notice the event and interpret it as a problem, and also we're having many stories from people who are graduate students in the past. So the problem at the graduate student level is becoming really out in the open. But we don't yet have the data that would serve a preventive function. So that's what we need, because let's say I'm a faculty member who, we want our faculty members to be inviting and supportive and welcoming to our students, especially grad students who come here and have a whole new life. But the question is, what are the boundaries? So let's say that I invite my advisees over to my house for dinner. And 90% of my colleagues would see no problem with that. But then I invite one person to stay after alone. And 90% of my colleagues would see that as problematic. So what if we had a poster that said, I don't know how you would do it, but most faculty want to provide nurturing, supportive environments for their grad students and do it in the following ways. Most would disapprove of whatever. That would be kind of what you're talking about, but we don't have that. So if we want to have a poster campaign, then we're using a media channel to inform people. So we call that social norms marketing, because it's a social marketing. If you want to do a small group norms, what Gavin described was the perfect example. He said, everyone take out a piece of paper, write down what you think, pass it in. He didn't ask them for data. He didn't actually say, what do you think other people think? He just said, tell me how you feel about this. But by reading it to everyone, he corrected the misperception. So that's what we call a small group norms intervention. There's something really fun we do in middle schools, which is we have everyone hand in the piece of paper. We say, everyone crumple up your piece of paper. So they crumple it up. And then we say, now we're going to have a snowball fight. Because it has to be age appropriate, right? So I won't do this with you. We say, okay, when I say 3, we're all going to throw our snowballs. 1, 2, 3, and we say, and every snowball has to be thrown 3 times. It's interesting to notice the gender difference because the boys throw the snowballs right at the faces of their friends. So all these snowballs are flying, and they say, everyone get a snowball and melt it, and open up your snowball. And then we say, raise your hand if this and this. So you can see now we use clickers. It's very quick, but there's all these different ways of delivering the normative feedback to the group. Then there's individual feedback. So let's talk about the human sexuality clinic. So I take a survey about my sexual behaviors and practices, and the survey also asks me what I think other people do. Now, from one point of view, it shouldn't matter when we're talking about sexual expression. If you and the other person are okay with it, it's your business. That's what I would say. But if I feel I'm deviant, like let's say I thought I was the only virgin on the Cornell campus of 13,000 people, which is actually what I thought when I was a freshman. I thought there was really something wrong with me. It would have been great for someone to tell me, well, like a third of the students are like you. So you can do it in a one-on-one context. And we call that tailored individualized normative feedback. And the goal is to correct the misperceptions. Now, going back to all the circles at the beginning, if you're doing this in all those circles at the same time, then you're really creating powerful momentum to change the culture. So we might say, on how many occasions have you been sexually active in the last 30 days? On how many occasions during the past 30 days do you think the average or typical student at the University of Minnesota Rochester has been sexually active? Or it could be on the football team or, in your sorority. For those of you who are in significant long-term relationships, the research in the past was done on people who were legally married, but I think it applies to serious long-term partners. Most married people think that other married people are having more sex than them. So it's very common. So, as I said, for relevance it may be, so let's say we wanted to do a University of Minnesota campaign, and we collected data from all the state campuses, and on each campus we had a poster that said, most University of Minnesota students at how many campuses are there? 5? All 5 campuses have not, have only had 0, 1, or 2 sexual partners in the last year. That would probably be what you'd find. If I'm at Duluth or Rochester, it's not going to mean anything to me to say, well, most people are doing X. I need to know on my campus or in my group, so we call that salience or relevance. The closer the norm, the more influential it is, and the more distant the norm. Once, when DARE went through one of these revisions, they started using social norms. So they put up a poster that said, most kids in your state. It's it's not going to do anything. It's not going to mean anything to someone. If you're in New York City, or let's take Minnesota. If you're in the Twin Cities, you're going to think, that's because of all the kids who live in the farm, in the cornfields. And if you think you live in a small rural town, you're not going to relate to it. So social marketing is using the techniques of social marketing to market the norm. So you collect your data. How many people did X in the last month? How many people think that most people did X in the last month? Now you have to choose your message. This isn't so simple. So let's take alcohol. It's easier for me to think of this. Let's say in a high school, 75% of the students don't drink alcohol. And 10% drink 1 drink a month. And 7% drink 2 drinks a month, and 7% drink more. What's the best poster? 93% had 0, 1, or 2 drinks in the last month? Or 75% had no drinks in the last month? Or 85% had 0 or 1 drinks? You see, they're all true. but which is going to be the most persuasive? So you have to have a focus group. You analyze your data, you make up all these possible messages, you get a group of your intended audience together and you show them all these statistics and you say, which do you like better? Which would be better for us to put on a poster? And what's really interesting is that each community is a little idiosyncratic. So one group might like the higher number and one group might like the percentage of abstainers. Same for the poster. You make different posters and then you show them to your audience and you let them pick it. But you have to make the poster according to certain guidelines. Like, you don't show the problem in the poster. When you have we were doing this middle school campaign and we wanted to have an art contest for the students and we forgot to give them guidelines. So we had all these anti-smoking posters with like a cigarette and cutting it with a scissor, and the kids did all these creative things, but it was calling attention to the opposite of what we wanted to call attention to. So if you are going to use an advertising or marketing firm, which I said has great expertise in getting attention, you need to train them in this approach because it's really a paradigm shift for them to focus on the positive. So the first two you do for everything. The poster you would only do for a marketing campaign. And then I want to talk at the end about places that have done both together, which I think is the more effective because it creates the synergy. So, how much of X exists? How much of X do others believe exists? Is X a norm? Is it positive, inclusive, and empowering? That's one of the guidelines we use. We call it the prevention PIE, P-I-E. Is a message positive, inclusive, and empowering? One thing that I feel is a deficiency in the mindset of the social norms approach is when we send messages about the majority, we don't think about how those messages play out for people who are historically not in the majority or who are in marginalized groups. So you have certain communities that are less likely to use alcohol. And then you have posters that say most students drink 0, 1, or 2. So I think we need to think about how to make our social norms messages more inclusive of the different communities, as well as to have social norms tailored messages. Like if you look at college students, from an ethnic point of view, the group that has the least problems with alcohol are African American students. Doesn't mean there aren't drinking problems in the African American community. It means, relatively speaking, that community is less likely to use and have problems with alcohol. So I would like to have a poster say, great work, keep up the good, I'd like to do something that would appreciate the health of different communities and not always just lump everybody together. So, yeah.
It's a very powerful message, but
it's very heteronormative.
Yeah, it's very heteronormative.
Correct. And sexual assault is very heteronormative. But still, I agree with you. So let me give you two options. First of all, the way violence plays out in different communities is different. For instance, if you look at the African American community, I once had a colleague who was a sexual assault advocate who was an African American woman, and she was like light brown. And we were talking about this, and she put her arm out and I said, how do you think I got to be this color? Because rape was part of slavery, right? A lot of the differences in skin colors in the community of color is not by voluntary sexual consenting sex. So, and look at alcohol. Talk about alcohol in Native American communities. You have to talk about it in a very different way, because they would get people drunk and then they would have them sign treaties. So you have to look at the intersectionality of these different things. And it turns out that in the GLBTQ community, the majority of assaults are still perpetrated by straight men on those communities, including in same-sex women in same-sex long-term relationships. Most of the sexual assaults experienced by those women are by straight men. So you have to contextualize it. So maybe what you do, I'm thinking out loud, maybe at the bottom of that poster you put, men confronting men is important for all of us because heterosexually identified males commit most sexual assaults for all groups. That would be a way to make that a more inclusive message. Or maybe you would do an intervention, I don't even like the word intervention, you do education within your LGBTQ community about how most, but not all, the assaults perpetrated against them are from hypersexual straight men. So then when they see the poster, they understand how to see it. But what you're asking is what absolutely needs to be done that isn't being done, right? What you're asking is the question of the next step that hasn't been taken. Because people get so excited about the fact that this works, and it does work. And it's complicated enough that they don't go the next step of really looking at all the intersectionalities of the different identities and how the message is felt or received by different groups that are not taught to think of themselves as normal. Does that make sense? It's always, I could give you a headache, really, because it's like really complicated. So if you think it's simple and you come listen to me and you go out thinking it's really complicated, you could get depressed. But in the end, you'll do something effective. Because now you understand what you're dealing with, and now you can consider, okay, well, how do I want to do a message that's not heteronormative, but the people I want to change are the heteronormative men? That's not no easy answer to that, but you can't pretend everything that we're all gender fluid and gender doesn't exist, because the people who believe in it the most are assaulting everyone else. I don't want to say the people who believe in those, the people who take it seriously in an unhealthy way. That's a great question. So, we would choose, so going back to which alcohol message do we do in the high school, we might feel that the 012 message is better because it's at 92%. But then what would happen is when students saw that poster, they would think in their minds, well, 5% are 0, 10% are 1, and 80% are 2. So then that doesn't work the way, that's why you have to do a focus group. So then maybe you put underneath, and 60% didn't drink at all. So then you correct the misperception of the misperception correction. That's always why you have to focus group these things, because if you're a parent, you could understand this. Well, actually, if you're just in a relationship, you could understand it. That sometimes you can't imagine how other people see the same thing that you see. But it's both, because both groups are in the misperception, and both groups are affected by the misperception.
But I suspect that you might come up with a different way of putting together a campaign. If your
yes, you're right, but that's
the primary goal is the 95%. I suspect we'd end up with a different kind of poster or message.
You would. But then you have to make a strategic decision who's your target audience, right? That's why you just don't collect data and throw up a poster. You really have to think through, what am I trying to accomplish by doing this? That's why, for instance, if you're designing a survey, like I said, most surveys don't even think about this. So you're designing a survey and you have to say, how do I want to use this information? How is this information going to help me? If I have this statistic that most people think X, but it's really Y, what value is that to me, right? Let's say, I'm going to make up something stupid, but let's say that most non-Asian Americans overestimate the use of chopsticks in Asian Americans because it's part of their culture to eat with chopsticks. That might be true, but it's like, would I feel more comfortable using chopsticks? It doesn't matter. You see what I'm saying? So you have to really be intentional about this. And if you want to design a media campaign that affects the 5%, you would do it differently. Personally, I wouldn't design a media campaign for the 5%. I would design a media campaign for the 95% to intervene with the 5%. But then you might find another channel to reach the 5% that would be reinforced by what you're doing with the 95%. So for instance, in some studies, if you show evidence of high-risk behavior, you get an invitation to participate in something else that's tailored to your high-risk behavior. Go ahead.
Probably the least likely to have any impact.
Yes. And a marketing for the campaign for the 5% is least likely to have an impact unless there's a place where most of the 5% hang out. And then you put it up there, right? So then 90% of the 5% get it, so that's the point. But here's what happened historically with the social norms approach. Because it was like the flavor of the month. Everyone was doing it, everyone was excited about it. It started out just as basically as a proposal by me and Wes Perkins, because we looked at some data and we saw that the misperception predicted the behavior. And then Michael Haynes from Northern Illinois tried it and had phenomenal success. So then 3 or 4 other campuses did it, like Western Washington and University of Arizona. There were certain pioneers. And everyone started getting great numbers. So everyone started doing it. And then everyone did it in a flaky way. It didn't ask the questions that you're asking. And then we had all these failures. And then the critics who didn't like it jumped on all the failures and said, this doesn't work. And even now, if you read the literature reviews, it says, well, the research for this is equivocal. Well, that's because the ones that didn't work didn't do it right. It's true of anything, right? You have to do it right if you want it to work. If you're sloppy about it, you can't just go put up posters and that's the end of it. So that's why I'm cautioning everyone that I think this is a really great idea, but it's a really difficult idea to implement. And if you don't do it thoroughly and thoughtfully, but to take your question, if we could do a really well-designed media campaign for the 95% who are bystanders, and then there was a place where the 5% hung out, which is probably not going to exist for faculty perpetrators, but maybe for students. Then we did a targeted campaign in the 5% place. Or like I said, flip it, the different concern is, how do I not further marginalize individuals with other sexual identities? So either I design my poster about the majority with a sub-message that fits them into the larger message, or I go to where they hang out and I tell them the information that will allow them to not feel marginalized by the message for everyone. You always have to be thinking on these 2 levels at the same time. And I would say that's one of the flaws of the social norms approach today and the sexual assault prevention field, is they don't really think carefully about the intersectionalities and how they influence how either people receive the message or how people deal with the bystander dilemmas that we discussed yesterday. So it's very complicated, so I love the questions that show the complexity, because then we have to really think about it. But that's why this campus and this system has such exciting opportunities, because imagine if the idea which is being floated to have a resource consortium and get all the people who are studying this area together and talk about how to empower the efforts of the task force. So you want to design the posters, so you select your possible statistics. So we decide that in this high school we're going to go with the 0, 1, 2, 95%, but say, and 60% had none. And in the other high school we're going to go with the 60%, because in that community there's parents going to freak out if we say that anyone drinks at all. You have to consider all these things, because in high school it's illegal. So we select our statistics and we market test them, which means doing a focus group, and then we design the pilot posters, and then we market test the poster designs. But remember, both the messages and the posters that we show have already been screened and chosen to be according to what we're trying to accomplish. You don't just get a bunch of students on your team and ask them to design posters. They need to understand the rules. Or same with an ad agency, that it's positive, inclusive, and empowering. Otherwise, I have a whole collection of terrible posters, that have to get thrown out. Actually, later I'm going to show you some posters that were a disaster, but I was a consultant on a project and I was out of the country and I was out of contact, so they went ahead and made these posters, and like they're the most phallic you'll see. It's a poster about men's involvement, but it's like this and this and this and this, and it's like, I said, could you change this? And it's like, no, I'm sorry, we had a deadline and we couldn't talk to you. It's like, you could do really bad stuff with this, like anything else. Then you select the final poster and statistic, and then you focus group it again, because now people aren't going to believe it when you put it up. So you solicit feedback through surveys and interviews. So maybe in high schools, they just go around the dining room and they say, "What did you see that poster? What did you think of that poster? What did your friends think of that poster?" Or you train the teachers to ask the students that.
I have another question about messaging. I want to ask the questions today. Thanks for people in the room.
I just want to, those of you who feel like you're talking too much, I promise you that if I felt it wasn't productive, I would shut you down. Because some people are not constructive in talking a lot, right? Has anyone ever noticed that? So don't worry about it.
Here's my question, kind of research. I mean, those are very different.
Good, no, it's a good, right. So the question based, and just for the record, which I didn't say, the research on the social norms approach with alcohol and other substances like cigarettes is really unbelievably strong. And it's you could say it's proven by experiment-controlled design and all that stuff. The research on violence is, we would say, a promising practice. The CDC is actually conducting a number of experiment-controlled trials now. So the question has to do with alcohol use behaviors are more public and sexuality-related behaviors are more private. So how does that affect how we do the campaign? And that's very important, because I'll give you another example. The way I like to say it, the culture of each issue is different. So for instance, most people who smoke want to stop smoking. But most people who drink are not planning to stop drinking. So in a social norm smoking campaign, we might put at the bottom about resources for stopping smoking. So the issue about sexual behaviors being more hidden, so let's say we don't know what faculty advisors, how they're relating to their students when they're alone in their office or in a lab with a few people. But we could agree that everything should be consensual and there's certain boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. So we have to identify a norm that relates to what we're talking about, even though we don't know what's happening. Because if we talk about sexual behavior, the people in her department will study it. But really, if I'm being sexually intimate with someone, all that matters is we both agree. You know, like I don't do anything with bondage, but they're the role model for consent, because there's really such clear guidelines on how to make sure it's okay. So we're not trying to address the hidden part. We're trying to address the unacceptable part. And the unacceptable part, we can establish that there's clear norms. Does that make sense? Because, for example, there's a gray area, right? That's what. So let's say the gray area is whether you pat someone on the back or give them a hug. I'll give you a really great example. My wife is a psychologist, and she's a very warm, affectionate person, and she hugs her patients a lot. And she does things that would be considered a no-no. But she isn't doing this now, but when she was in a full-time private practice, she would wear a lab coat when she was doing therapy. And then she would give people these amazing hugs, but the fact that she was wearing a lab coat took away the confusion. You understand what I'm saying? By dressing a certain way, the hug was perceived in a different way. So we have to have different strategies for negotiating the gray area. Like some people might not mind a pat on the back or a hug, and some people would. But at a certain point, it's not acceptable for anyone. So we also have to teach people how to negotiate the gray area, which is harder. But if we start really raising the issues and people start thinking about it, then you could tell if it's okay with that person if you pat them on the back, because you're watching to see. That's why affirmative consent is really so essential, because both people should agree to everything. And the idea that one person has to tell you that they don't agree is unacceptable. You have to make sure they agree before you do it. That's the essence of affirmative consent. It really shouldn't be controversial, but it's controversial. So does that make sense? So you're right, but we get around it by just establishing the norms for what's acceptable and unacceptable, and then we do further work about how to negotiate the gray areas. So here's one of the early posters from University of Arizona. They have an engaging photo. Now, some places they use stock photos. Some places they don't use photos. A university in Arizona, they would get people to sign a release so that they could use their picture. But you also have to be careful because let's say that I was a real pothead my freshman year. And now I don't smoke pot and I'm a health advocate or I'm a student that works at the Aurora Center. And you put me in a poster about marijuana use and all my old roommates are going, oh, I can't believe that Alan Berkowitz is in that poster for, so some people use stock photos for that reason, but in this case, you can also use photos of your own students. Now, here's an example. The original poster said 65% have 4 or fewer drinks when they go out. And then they realized people were misinterpreting that, so they put or no drinks. And then they realized people were still underestimating the amount of no, so then they had another generation of posters that said have 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and X% have 0. That's why you always need to be focus grouping it, because you need to understand how people are perceiving it. So you have an engaging photo or not, a normative message, a tagline, which is the theme of the campaign. In this case, we got the facts from you as the theme of their campaign, a credible source, right? So if the Dean of Students' Office, if the Office of Greek Life is perceived as trying to shut down fraternities and sororities, they're not a good one to do the survey, right? Because it won't be seen as credible. And then you have a recognizable logo. Does that make sense? So in small groups, we already had a few great examples of you collect the data in the workshop or prior, you integrate into the presentations, you engage the audience to say, so Gavin's example is a little atypical in a good way because they had such a great discussion, they told him he could leave the room. But if it was a more formal workshop, he'd say, well, could you all explain to me, how come you all thought this was really terrible? But you didn't realize that other people agreed with you, and you all live together, and you see each other every day, and you go in the same bathroom to do your business. Then you get people to really think about it and understand it. This is why also it's better to combine a small group norms intervention with a poster campaign, because in the small group norms intervention, you have a chance to have the discussion that helps people be educated about what's behind the poster. And then the people who are in the leadership role, you work with them to support the healthy norms. So we call that the small group norms challenging approach. And the individual is one-on-one. And if you ever heard of basics, the most research on an alcohol intervention that's effective is basics. And basics is very simple. You take a survey that asks you all these questions about your drinking behaviors, and then it asks you about what you think most people do. And then you sit down and someone doesn't say, Alan, you have a serious drinking problem and your liver is going to be completely corroded in 10 years. Right? You don't say that. You just say, okay, let's look at what are the results of your survey. You said that you drink 4 times a week, and you thought that most gophers drink 4 or 5 times a week. But actually, most gophers drink either 0 or 1 time a week. So that's interesting. Let's look at how much money you spend on alcohol each month. You spend $150, and most students on campus only spend 30, and 30% don't spend any. And you just keep going through, and you see how you're really introducing cognitive dissonance. Because if I have an alcohol problem and I'm in denial about it, part of the ways I deny it is I justify that, well, you were there at the bar on Thursday night, you were there on Friday night, and you were there on Saturday night. What are you all giving me a hard time for? Alan, we were each there one night. You were there 3 nights, So this is really powerful, and there's amazing research on this. And actually, I just co-authored an article with some colleagues where we explained how you use this approach in sexual assault prevention workshops for men, right, to deal with the defensive,ness, etc. So they're doing this with domestic violence abusers, and I think it's applicable for use with sexual assault perpetrators, but I don't think it's been done yet. So going back to the circles, we have an individual intervention, we have a group intervention, and we have a community intervention, and then we train the leaders to talk about everything in a way that's consistent with all those different interventions. Ready for some case studies? Some of these we saw already. So I developed a rape prevention program for men that Chris Gittich from Ohio University got a CDC grant to test. And what they did was they took first-year students, and in one residence hall, the women got a risk reduction workshop, which is what she's most known for, and the men got my workshop, and the experimental group got neither. And you wouldn't be surprised, right, to know that my workshop had bystander intervention and social norms. And we also talked about consent, and we also, when we gave them the normative feedback, we told them about themselves as a group, which were men living together in the same residence hall and men on campus. And then we had them do some small groups scenarios about, like, how would you respond as a bystander? So here's the results. The men who took the workshop perceived that their peers would be more likely to intervene, including the sexually aggressive men. So let's say I scored high on certain questions, and that put me in the category of being a sexually aggressive male. You all perceived that each other would intervene more, and I, who's the problem, perceived that you would intervene more. They all perceive less reinforcement from their peers for sexually aggressive behavior. It should say including sexually aggressive men, not among. So then I thought, this is great. They associate, like, you all don't hang out with me anymore. Right? Like, you all figured out that you have a lot in common with each other and you don't with me, so I'm alone. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so at the end of 4 months, sexual assaults went down by 75%. Chris Gittich is, I will just say, a really rigorous scientist. She doesn't let me get away with anything. You know, you have to adhere to a protocol, blah, blah, blah. So great, right? Guess what? At 6 months, the difference went away. So I think this is one of the strongest outcomes in the literature. But why doesn't it last? Because nothing lasts forever. Even with, I said, with bystander rebound, what else do we need to do to sustain this? And actually, if you think of the methodology of perps, they just went home on the weekend and perped. Like, they felt it wasn't, you know, okay, that's why you can kick, if I'm a perp, you can kick me out, and then I'll just go enroll somewhere else in the system and I'll go perp again there. Like, if you're following the news about prep schools and teacher perpetrators in prep schools, and or priests, those are two good examples, how they were never properly dealt with, and so they just went somewhere else and perpetrated again. In this case, no, because it was well done. I mean, that's where you have to, that's a design question. If you design your study in such a way that you have artificial influences, then you don't have robust findings. You can't have faith in your findings. But in this case, the men came into the workshop at the beginning of the fall term of their freshman year in the room with the other men in their residence hall. Then at 4 months, we did a booster. So they came in and they got a little booster for half an hour, and they took a survey. And by the way, this is a CDC-funded study, so they all got, like, gift cards to go to Target. You know, we had all these incentives that the rest of us don't have. Then we did another survey at 6 months. So at 4 months, we found the 75% drop compared to the control group, which just had some neutral workshop. And at 6 months, the differences went away. And this is part of my argument that you have to have a comprehensive suite of programs that are mutually reinforcing, and no one thing that anyone is doing is enough by itself. That's why I think for this campus, collaboration really has to be the main, you know, the really main focus is that, you know, like in the military, they've redefined the criteria for promotion so that they do all these climate surveys, and a lot of the questions are, do you feel that the leaders in your unit take this seriously? So now I'm a captain and I'm looking to get promoted to a major, and in the past they never care about any of this. But now it's like, Alan, what's the problem? They all think you don't care about this. You can tell me till you care about this till you're blue in the face, but you're not communicating this to your soldiers. This is going to affect your promotion. So you need to incentivize. So here on this campus, we need to really incentivize collaboration. It should be part of all your performance reviews. Maybe we can't put that on your performance review if you're on the faculty, but the rest of the folks, it should really be important.
More expansive about it. So I just want to put that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we could do. I'll give you two ideas of things we could do with the faculty culture, but it's not the topic of this talk. The tradition in academia is that personal conduct is not relevant to your performance review. Well, my opinion is if I'm charged with a serious crime and I'm up to become full professor, you should postpone the review until you decide if I committed sexual assault. Or you should give me full professor if that's what you were planning to do, and say, but this is contingent on your being found innocent. The other thing is, if you look at a recent event that happened here but could be anywhere, is a professor was outed for engaging in a chronic pattern of misbehavior going back over many decades. And it just came to light. So the question I have is, if that behavior was taking place at the time of one of that faculty member's promotions and that behavior had been known, then that could have been a factor to deny the promotion. So how do we design a system where all these things come to light quickly? So there's a lot of things, but I was just making a joke about collaboration because we know the model doesn't always encourage collaboration. Thank you. So here's something really interesting. That it isn't there, but that's the citation. So here's something interesting. Pornography use went down and stayed down. Guess what? We didn't talk about pornography. Could someone explain to me how pornography use went down? We didn't even mention the word. Anyone have a theory? Okay, so let's look at this. So I'm the sexually aggressive guy in our group, and I have a lot of porn. I have a hard drive of my computer full of porn videos. So I invite you all to my room on Saturday night to watch porn. And you all come because you're lonely first-year freshmen and you don't know what to do and everyone's coming, so you come because it's like, but you don't want to be there. Because most guys don't enjoy porn. But then you go to this workshop and you realize that the way I am isn't the way most of you are, and I do things that most of you don't like, and you start hanging out less with me. So now you go to a movie on Saturday night or whatever. So even though we didn't talk about porn, because we redefined the peer culture and how it was perceived, the guy who was into porn, who was the minority, who thought it was the majority, is now alone. So we had, in the literature they call these ripple effects. So it isn't that the whole thing was a washout, because I think to lower sexual assaults by 75%, but it's the whole idea is that one workshop isn't enough. It has to be synced. It's like if you're old-fashioned and you drive a clutch car, the gears, right, have to be synced, and you have to shift gears at the right time. So all the programs have to be synced. So we could have a whole discussion of what could we have done to sustain this effect. We could have trained the RAs to talk about bystander behavior with the guys and about the misperception of the norm. We could have had a marketing campaign in that residence hall. We could have done a lot of other things that would have kept this going.
So if we looked at the socio-ecological model, this would have been sort of limited to that individual approach with nothing else
or the group approach with nothing else, because it was a CDC-funded study. But as you're planning to go ahead in this campus, that's why you all need to be talking to each other and say, what's the Aurora Center doing? What's the athletic department doing? What are the health advocates doing? What are people teaching in their classes? Because the more you sync it all, then you create powerful stuff. And then maybe you'll never be able to evaluate it and say, what caused what, but you'll have a healthier campus. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful.
So here's a high school I've been talking about a lot, and what was really great about this high school that isn't reflected in the PowerPoint is we did so many great things over so many years. They even made this video that's so cool. They made a video and it starts out saying, well, here's a normal day at Vernon High School, and they show a bus pulling up. A bus of 60 students just pulled up, and now there's 60 students getting off the bus. It was really corny. But they did it in such a way that they really showed you how the misperception operates, and we never talk about what's normal. So all the students saw this video. So this is one of their posters. Vernon High School students prefer to keep the drama on stage. Most are alcohol-free so they can participate in sports and activities. Now here's something interesting. The survey they were using, which was an Illinois state survey, only asked students negative motivations for not using alcohol. And we decided we couldn't use any of those things for a poster, so we made up our own questions. I care about my relationships with my parents. So we have all these good reasons for not using alcohol. And that's what we put on the posters. But we had to actually change the survey to get the data that would work. And it says in the banner, 81% alcohol-free, the choice is yours. That was their theme, the choice is yours. Here's another paradigm shift. The graph is not showing you how many use, it's showing you how many don't use. And the percentage who don't use is going up for alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana. So already you're reframing how you talk about the issue. Now, if a social norms campaign works, that as the misperception goes down, non-use should go up. So this is just to show the bottom line is less and less people misperceive and more people perceive correctly. And the main thing about this study that isn't reflected in the slides is what I've been saying all along. It's an excellent example of the process. So when the students said they didn't believe the data because they were afraid the teachers were reading their surveys and they wouldn't answer honestly, we changed the method of collecting the data. When the students said they didn't answer honestly, we had posters that said 97% of you said you answered honestly. We had all these lunch and learns for the teachers. We got the teachers really engaged. We got the athletes really engaged. They did this video of what's normal. At one point, they got all upset and they called me up because some parents were going to bring in one of these anti-drug scare speakers. So I had a phone call with the principal and they decided not to have the speaker. Actually, one thing I should say about this that was really good. So the Illinois Department of Health gives grants to county health departments. And in terms of alcohol use, they have 5 different areas they could focus on, like enforcement, blah, blah, blah. And for each of those areas, you could apply for a specialist consultation. So I had a phone call with these folks once a month. And actually what we also did was we found that most of the clients weren't prepared to do this. So they created a workshop and they said, if you want to apply for a social norms consultation, you have to all go to this workshop. So this campaign was really getting coached once a month by me, and one month they complained about someone who wasn't cooperating and wasn't part of the team, and I said, let's invite that person on the call next month. The same with the Ohio University campaign. The peer facilitation training was so intensive. Like we did this workshop where I said, tell me all your worst fears, and then I role-played every one with them. So what's behind a successful intervention is very often hidden, but it's what makes it work. You know, and very often we don't get credit for that, or our supervisors think it'll just take us a few extra hours of our time and we'll have peer educators and they'll do all the work. And it's like, who's supervising the peer educators? Who's doing role plays? Gavin is going into the residence hall at night. Is he getting like a raise for that? Does he get to come in late in the morning? You know, sometimes we make unrealistic demands on the people delivering the services. So we need to give them the resources they need to do what we're asking them to do. So this is interesting because this is an experiment control study for alcohol that Bill DeYoung from the now defunct Higher Education Center got. So they got a match experiment control group of schools. And they designed a social norms intervention where they helped the schools design the posters, they had manuals, they had all this stuff. And the experiment schools did a social norms campaign and the control schools didn't. And what they found is that alcohol use went up in the control schools, but it stayed the same in the experiment schools. Now that's interesting because if they haven't done an experimental control design, they would have thought it was a failure because it didn't change, but it prevented it from getting worse, which is why you all really needed to build in a strong evaluation component. Now here's something interesting. Part of the grant was that if you were in the control group, you would get the intervention the next year or the next 2 years. So when they did the second group, they found no effect. And they said, what's going on? How come we did good the first time, we didn't do good the next time? They did a study and they found out it was correlated with bar density. The schools that had the greatest concentration of bars had no effect because the bars were wiping it out, right? All these free drink specials, all these ladies' nights, all these things. So you always have to look at the bigger environment and how the bigger... I'm involved in a study now, one of these CDC-funded studies. We're looking at like porn shops and things like that and the density of sex outlets that are visible near a school, and we're seeing if that's correlated with the behaviors of the students. So one conclusion of this would be we need a task force that deals with bars and bar behaviors. Another would be maybe if they did, the amount of assistance that these schools got was very minimal. So maybe if they had given them more robust support, they would have overcome the effect of the bars. But it's a good example of how something in one of the outer circles erases what you're doing in one of the inner circles. So here's a high school norms media campaign, and they had posters for boys and girls together or separate posters for each. And they decided to focus on healthy relationships. So they surveyed the kids, what are the characteristics of a healthy relationship? Both people make their own decisions, blah, blah, blah. So we asked boys, do you agree or disagree? I don't like to hear boys talk trash about girls or women. Now, even the phrasing of that sentence might come out of a focus group. So even before you design your survey, you have to focus group your survey. Because you have to, I'll give you a quick, interesting story. When the social norms approach got really hot, the Kansas Health Foundation decided to do like a super duper campaign for all the state schools in Kansas. And they hired a dream team of social norms experts, of which I wasn't a part, which I had feelings about at the time, but it's a long time ago. And they did this campaign. And the theme of the campaign was most Kansas State, different campuses have 4 or less drinks when they party, which is a common message. And the campaign didn't work. But they had all the experts. And then they did focus groups, and they found out that the word party means something different in Kansas than in Washington or Arizona or Illinois. The meaning of the words is situational. So because they just used what had been successful somewhere else, it wasn't successful. So you need to focus group the wording of the message or the wording of the question on the survey. So 83% of the boys agreed or strongly agreed, but they underestimated now you could make an argument, you could say, but it's actually a norm that most boys don't like trash talk because it's 63 perceived, but we felt there's still a gap that was big enough that we could use this. So we made this poster. 4 out of 5 gateway guys really don't want to hear trash talk about girls. Here's what they do about it. What they do about it, we got from a focus group, because we didn't ask that in the survey. But if this campaign had continued, which it didn't, we would have asked all these questions in the next survey. What do you do when you hear guys trash talk? And then we could have had a stronger message that said, 75% of guys do at least 2 of the following. See how that would even be a stronger message? Because this part would have a normative component. So the theme of their campaign was your survey, your results. This is one of the posters. These 3 things, couple shared decision making, they had a poster for each of them. And at the end of a few months, they had one poster with all of them. 80% of you agreed that in most relationships. Okay? So, the boys were more likely to know that most other guys didn't like trash talk. The boys were more likely to know that most other guys made sure they had consent. Here's an interesting thing. By norming healthy relationships, more people said they had a friend in an abusive relationship. And more boys were likely to intervene. One frustrating thing for me is that a lot of these studies never get published. Because, they're done by practitioners in the field. They don't have the academic training. They don't have the resources. They're not partnered with the researcher. So there's really amazing stuff. Actually, the Vernon Hills study didn't get published, and it's one of the strongest. Any questions? So now we'll just talk quickly about how we put these together, and then we'll talk about what you want to do with all this here. So I presented this yesterday. Central Missouri, they collected data from fraternities and sororities. They made tailored workshops. So they had a generic PowerPoint, but then they put in the data for your sorority in the PowerPoint, and they went to your sorority and told you about yourself. And they had the bystander intervention video contest, which I explained yesterday. You had to do a video about a bystander intervention and then submit it, and then someone won a prize. And that was really good. So then you had to practice intervention skills with your friends while you were making the video. You had to decide how you would intervene. So you can see here's a good campaign where they have multiple mutually reinforcing interventions. Because then in that institution they also have some kind of required orientation advising course for first-year students. So they developed this as a sexual assault intervention in the first-year student seminar. So they used clickers and they did role plays. And they asked about all these things. And as I said yesterday, my favorite social norms question in the world is when I would like you to intervene against me. Because then you don't have to worry about if it's okay. So this shows that in one fraternity, 73% were very much bothered when they saw someone harassing or bothering someone from their chapter, but they underestimated the concern. So remember, if this is that fraternity and I'm showing this to you, we're talking about how you all really feel and how come you all don't know. So it creates a very good discussion. And in one sorority, it isn't always 100, but it's always well over 90. Everyone wanted someone to drink in when they were doing the following. So then the question is, because we haven't done this for sexual harassment and sexual assault, what would I want my peers to do if they saw me? So let's make up something. Let's talk about the faculty. There are certain things that a faculty member could do in the gray zone that could be misinterpreted, but the faculty member isn't a predator. So what if we ask faculty members, when would you want another faculty member to say something to you? When they thought I was crossing a boundary in the gray zone about how I made myself available to students. So let's say that 95% of the people in my department say they would want someone to say something to them in X situation. And then that gives you the opportunity to come to me and say, you know, Alan, I know this would never happen with you, but I think something that you're doing is creating the wrong appearance or is being misinterpreted. And I know you wouldn't want people to think that, so I'm just giving you some feedback that you're a very warm physical person, but some of your graduate students aren't comfortable with that. Actually, that's my personal problem. I'm a very warm physical person, so sometimes I have to like pull it back because it's misinterpreted. So these are great questions, but then we'd have to ask, what's your version of this question? And then you could do it by different communities. So they had a poster, you know, where they gave all their data. But you could see how there's a great campaign because it had multiple synergistic elements. And it's another one that wasn't published, but you see that in 1 year, intervening behavior went up by 8%, approximately. And actually, comfort with intervening behavior. So far, so good? Okay, here's the one where I was out of the country when they chose their posters. This is a really well-done project. At Florida State, they had a campus-wide campaign. I showed you data from their survey. They had men's and women's workshops. They had a community action team. They asked all these great questions on their surveys that was online, administered to men. They analyzed their survey data, and they decided their social norms campaign would have 3 themes. By the way, there's something on my website called, I think it's called the Social Norms Toolkit, which is like a how-to, and there's a case study of Florida State in there. So they decided they would have a poster on each of these themes because their data was good for each of these themes. So first of all, if part of the problem with the way masculinity is taught is that every man has to be the best, it's unhealthy. Everyone can't be a winner. Everyone can't, conquer everyone else. So any real men campaigns or measure up campaigns is right away bad. And also, when you also think about the way masculinity is laid on, all the men who are taught that they're not real men because, they act in ways that are perceived as feminine or they're not having sex with women or blah, 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 blah. It's really toxic. So I'm sorry to say this is a campaign that in some unintentional way is promoting toxic masculinity. Because the theme of the campaign is that most men measure up. Well, going back to our discussion, well, I don't measure up because I like men. Or I don't measure up because I take ballet. Or, think of all the examples. So 97% would admire someone who intervened to prevent a sexual assault. But then you have this statue which is on campus, so that's part of the campus culture, but I think it's a Native American, I can't tell. It's a horse rearing up, and it's a guy with a spear, and then you have all these arrows going up. It's like, oh my God, who came up with this? An advertising agency, right? The Measure of a Man. Bad poster. How do FSU men measure up? Okay, but the message is good. 98% of you agree that if a close friend were in an abusive relationship, you would want someone to intervene. Measuring up is about making the right choices. Well, you can make the right choices without measuring yourself against, other men to be a real man. So this one's okay, right? Except it's still FSUmenmeasurup.com. So what you need to realize is you're going to probably do something that you really regret. And it's just part of the process. You just fix it and go forward. Right? You can't think of everything that you shouldn't do before you do it. It's called, Monday morning quarterbacking or backseat driving. Look at that. So anyway, we do the best we can and we go forward. So on the one hand, there's a really good campaign because they had all these different components. They had all these different themes in their media campaign. But unfortunately, the choice of the campaign theme and the choice of the posters was undermined their otherwise really good efforts. Okay? But they still had some outcomes. They corrected the misperceptions. They had more men who said they would get consent. They had more men who would stop. And they had more men who would intervene. And they had the better outcomes for the workshop, which is understandable because an interactive workshop is a stronger type of intervention than a media campaign. Okay? Let's talk about online courses in case any of your students or staff should ever have to take one. So Everfi evaluated their alcohol EDU online course for undergraduates, which has produced positive outcomes because in a way it's done like an example of individualized, tailored normative feedback, and they found that the success of the course was explained by the correction of the misperception. So the misperception was like the active ingredient. There are 2 other online courses integrating normative feedback and bystander intervention that have shown positive outcomes. One of them was a program that I was a consultant on at Emory University that was called Real Consent. That was a program for men, and there's a published study about that, but unfortunately, for political reasons, that program has never been marketed and made available. So there's a study from Haven that is just accepted for publication, and we tried to analyze when people took Haven, what were the different areas that were likely to produce the most change or benefit from the course, which is basically saying what should we focus on, and we found that it was social norms and bystander intervention. And I mentioned some other times, we also found there's a group of 20 or so % who really hate the course and have a negative reaction. So I feel that's okay. You know, like if the University of Minnesota has certain values, and I come here and you tell me those are your values and I don't like it, well, that's who we are. If you want to come here, this is where you're coming. And if you don't like this, you could still come here and hopefully change or not come here. But if you don't want to have a roommate who's X, Y, and Z, you don't have a choice if you come here. So I don't really mind, or I'm not surprised that there's a backlash against the course. But I think we have to think about how we're going to work with that population, because that's the one who'll give you a hard time in your class, and that's the one who'll give you a hard time in a workshop and say, my friend was sexually assaulted. And, you know, actually I heard that some of the feedback from orientation is that women are upset that they're not talking about women assaulting women. So we have to deal with the critics. So in the case of orientation, maybe we build into the orientation sexual assault prevention education the idea that sexual assault could happen between any 2 people of any sexual orientation. It could happen between 2 women, between 2 men, between a woman perpetrating a man. But 99.9% of sexual assaults are committed by men who identify as heterosexual on women who primarily identify as heterosexual or not. So we're primarily talking about male and female in this workshop because that's the truth. That's what's happening out there in the world. Then next year you won't get these complaints because you dealt with the argument. You took away the argument before it was made. So we have to deal with it. We have to acknowledge that there's a population of our students who are very, very resistant to what we're trying to do. And maybe if we didn't have those students here, we wouldn't have as much of a problem, but they're here. So that was the backlash. So one of the things I've been asking, since you're using Everfi, is if we could extract data from your courses, survey administration, that could be used for social norms campaigns with different groups on campus. Like if I'm in the School of Public Health, am I identified as being from the School of Public Health when I take the Everfi survey? Because then you could design some questions that you could use for a media campaign for my school with the data that you got from everyone who took the course. So there's some really exciting possibilities. And one of the sad things about online education is many institutions are using it as an excuse to not do more, as opposed to the first step in doing a lot more. So here we're not, we don't have people cutting our budgets because they're spending them. I mean, imagine if health education's budget was cut because they needed to take Julie's money and use it to pay for Everfi. That would be, I would call that a sin or really stupid. But I know of examples where that's happened. So I want to just give another example of a culturally specific campaign. So in Montana, and it relates to this idea of alternate identities. Montana has one of the largest Native American populations in the U.S. And we know that in a tribal or indigenous context, the meaning of the use of tobacco is very different because it has a sacred use. So in addition to doing a statewide tobacco campaign for youth, they called their data and they asked particular questions about tobacco use, and they were able to say most Native American teens believe that we should keep tobacco sacred. So that's an example of how you could have a generic campaign for everyone, and within that campaign you could have messages that are directed at specific subpopulations. But the good thing also about this is everyone else on campus is seeing, or in high school is seeing this poster. So it's also serving to re-educate the dominant group that has prejudices or lack of information about the cultural minority group. I think one of the unexplored powerful uses of the social norms approach is to address social justice issues. To me, that's something that excites me personally the most, that has not really been tried or used. There's preliminary research that supports that it would work, but people haven't done the campaigns because no one's giving you federal funding to address homophobia or Islamophobia or racism, So people are doing what they can afford. Okay, so it could be single or multiple issue. It has to contain multiple synergistic elements. It has an interactive component whenever and however possible. It reaches students through multiple channels. It trains leaders not to be carriers. It uses an oversight coordinating committee. It's sustained over time. It's positive. And when you talk about bystander intervention, it's not punitive. So just some quick things. So you have to be ready, right? So to do social norms, you have to have an infrastructure. And you have to train the leaders before you do this so that rather than them not understanding what you're doing, they're supporting what you're doing. The norms have to be salient to the audience, and as we said, it could be a norm that's salient to anyone on campus or a particular subgroup that's on campus. And the group has to function as a group. Some of the early failures of the social norms approach, let's take where I live in California. If you had a poster that said most Californians, that wouldn't mean anything to me because it's who's that? But if you did it in Maine or Texas or Montana, in Montana there's an identity of being a Montanan. So in Montana they did a Most of Us campaign for Montana, but you couldn't do that in California or New York. So if your campus is so heterogeneous that no one feels they belong to anything, either you need to identify some values that everyone shares across groups, and you could say most Gophers from all groups, identities, and sexual orientations would help a friend, blah, blah. Otherwise it will fail, which would happen. And this is what I was talking about earlier, is the marginalized groups we may unintentionally marginalize them further by talking about most in a way that doesn't pertain to them. So we need to design messages that are salient. As I said, we assume that people won't believe us. So how do we address believability? We have to always talk to people about, do you believe this? What do you think of this? Why not? What do your friends think? And now in the CDC grants, we're training the teachers to talk to the students in the classroom about this. And then when they tell us why they don't believe it, we address it, such as we change how we administer the survey. So here's a good poster. So this campus had a poster that said 70% of students drink 0, 1, 2, or 3. right? So some wise guys, I'm making an assumption that some guys did this, said the other 30%. Who are they? People who weigh less than 110 and have 10 to 14 the night before. It's very creative, actually. You have to give them credit, right? And there's all the beers they're drinking. So usually what happens when this happens is the people doing the campaign freak out and get all upset. But this is actually a great opportunity because people are paying attention to what you're doing. So now you could have an article in the student newspaper and you put this poster there and you say, what about the other 30%? And you say, we really appreciate that students are paying attention to our posters and that this was a really creative poster, but we'd like to clarify who the other 30% are. 70% drink 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and anyone who drinks over 4, 80% of those people drink 5, right? And in fact, only 0.5% drink 10 to 14 the night before. So you're using the criticism to go the next step and address the assumptions of the criticism. So do you have an effective means of evaluation? As I said, will your measurements detect changes? Because if you say most students drink 0 to 4, and your change in your drinking is from 3.5 to 2.5, it's still less than 4. So if your instrument doesn't detect that change, it will seem that you didn't change anything. Can you have a control or comparison group? As I showed with that study, the experimental group stayed the same and the control group got worse. So how can we be sensitive to that? The ripple effect, like the pornography, how would you measure those? Are there other external influences influencing your campaign? So what happened with the social norms approach is that there were so many examples of success, and they were sustained, like in many of these campuses, like I showed you with Vernon Hills, non-use went up, up, up each year. Administrators started having really unrealistic expectations of social norms campaigns. And they either started wanting people to do miracles with insufficient resources, or they wanted us to get rid of all high-risk drinking. So you have to prime your leaders for what is a realistic outcome. Like we know that if the task force is really successful, reports will go up. So we have to set realistic expectations for our efforts. So you want to keep things fresh. So, because there's something that we call habituation, where people get tired of your posters. So, for instance, let's say you're talking about alcohol. Well, some campuses do what are called event-specific norms, like St. Patrick's Day or football games, or when you become 21. So then they do targeted campaigns about a specific time of life or protective behavior. Or you focus on other issues. Or you look at the issue developmentally. So now we're talking about making it possible for victims to get support, and most people would respect someone who told someone, and then the next year we focus on bystander intervention. So you think of when you succeed in accomplishing one goal, what's your next goal? And then you tailor your campaign to be developmental over time. Or you might deal with, last night we were talking about, gender socialization is obviously related to sexual assault. So maybe you bring in speakers who talk about gender socialization, and you tie that with what you're doing in sexual assault prevention. And if you really think about it, the social norms approach is a way of thinking about life. It's not only an intervention technique, because anytime anyone says, well, most whatevers, the first 5 or 10 years I was doing trainings on this, I would say really absurd things in front of a group like this. I would say, well, most, and then I would go, did you hear what I just said? Because it's like your brain is wired to see the extreme. So it's a form of training yourself, and then it's a way of talking to people. So you say, well, are you sure that most people are doing this? Where there's anyone who's doing this, what about this? And once you get going, you really want to spread this around. So you want to have people that go around and share the data and have discussions about it, et cetera, like you do with your graduate student survey and your mental health and other things. When you have a critic, you have to use that as an opportunity. So let's say I'm a statistics professor and I'm teaching research methodology, and I trash your survey in my course. Like I tell 300 students that your data is bogus. Well, somebody could get upset, right? So you just go talk to that professor and say, we'd really like to take advantage of your expertise. We'd really would like your advice. What would you change on our survey? And usually what happens, I look at your survey and say, oh, this is great. I didn't realize some of my students told me this. Or else they point out some things and you fix it. So you view every challenge as an opportunity. So we can go back to where we started and see how we put all these things together. So in the end, the critical question is what increases or decreases the misperception? Anything that increases the misperception, including how we talk, is bad for prevention, and that there's more to life than the social norms approach, but it's worth considering using. So why don't we do this just for a few minutes? You could stay at your tables unless there's someone at another table that you work with or something and you want to talk to them, but I think it'd be good to talk about what healthy norms do I want to strengthen with my audience, whatever that is, what unhealthy norms do I want to reduce, what elements of what we are already doing would be most synergistic with norms correction or would be better. You know, like when we're talking about workshops for men, because of the nature of sexual assault and masculinity, we know that giving normative feedback with a workshop for men is better. That's why I was a little critical yesterday of a lot of the existing programs, because they haven't been updated. Like MVP, which is a great program, doesn't include a norms feedback component. But it seems to me MVP, which is already great, would be greater if they surveyed the misperceptions in the group and then they did all their other things. What resources do you have in the community to support it, including data? So for instance, Scott and I have been having an email train because he's involved in a survey for graduate students. What's it called? Grad Serve. And then there's an undergrad serve. So it's a very comprehensive quality of life climate survey for graduate students. So then we were talking about what could we add to that survey that they could make available to some of their constituent institutions that they would then have the data to do a social norms campaign? Because you don't always have to go out and start from scratch. You build onto what you already have. And then we want to ask, who are the carriers of the misperception? When Wes Perkins and I first started doing social norms, we were in the small liberal arts college, and there was a quad in the middle, a small quad, and the most desirable housing was for senior men along the edge of the quad. And one day we were walking on campus at the end of the day, and some seniors were having a keg out there in the quad, and guess who was having a few beers with them? The president. Well, that wasn't really helping bring down the misperception, right? It was making the behavior very visible. So I'll just add a few more questions. Where could you integrate normative feedback into your institutional efforts, including the classroom? What norms do you want to address? What norms are influential and misperceived? What are the resources that you need? And who are the carriers? So why don't we take 10 or 15 minutes and talk amongst yourselves? It's also a good time if someone needs a quick break to run out and come back. But I think it'd be really good to take some time to talk about how you would use all of this. And if you feel you want to change tables, that would totally be fine. Okay, are we ready to wrap up? If you can hear me, clap once. If you could hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. This is a very disobedient campus, but in a good way, because a lot of times you don't do the assignment. But that's because you're really engaged. Like yesterday, people said, well, we didn't role play because we had a great discussion, so I'm happy. So if you didn't want to stop talking, I'm happy. Anyone want to share something from your table that just came up that you think would be interesting to share with the rest of the group? Yes, that's really hugely important, is to reach, and when I went through all these other campaigns, they reached their target population through multiple different avenues. And I believe the reason why the CDC workshop, which was so successful for 4 months, didn't sustain itself is it was just an experiment control funded by a government agency, and we weren't working with the Student Affairs Division on that campus, and we weren't designing multiple. But here you have someone from orientation who's delivering information to 6,000 of your students each year. And then you have all these other. So that's why I think for me collaboration is the theme. Because you need to collaborate in order to design those multiple channels. And maybe if it's within a college, it's multiple channels within that student's experience. And in the case of a graduate student, the graduate student experience is much more isolated and contained. And in certain colleges, like when I went to Cornell, you never saw the architecture students. Like they just didn't exist, the architecture students and law students. And even though they were right in that building over there, unless you went and had coffee in their coffee place, they were in this little bubble. But maybe other disciplines, like I was in psych. So you have to think about all those things. But in the end, you have to build in the multiple channels. Totally important point. And that's the necessity for collaboration, because as I said, some of you are doing great things, but it's just one point and one blip in the student's experience, and it's not connected. So you need to build those connections, which are, if this was like McAllister, right? Everything we're talking about would be so much easier, right? Everyone knows everyone. It's just a totally different world. But we're here, but if you do it here, it will be very significant, I think, for the whole country. And in 1 or 2 years, the rest of the Big Ten will start pounding you to know what you're doing, and they're going to want to do everything you're doing here. So it's easier said than done. I hope that's clear. But still, as a way of thinking and talking, it's something we could all do, which is to say, what do you mean by most? Or I saw Alan and Scott get drunk, but it seemed to me most other people didn't get drunk. So it's really a way of thinking. As I said, key stakeholders must be trained, and in the end, someone will always screw it up for you and ruin it, and then you just get that person on board. Or for instance, with alcohol, imagine if you're doing an alcohol campaign, and just when you're about to launch your campaign, you have a drunk driving death. You're not going to start putting posters up that most students don't drink. So you have to consider. So as I said, the technical aspects are challenging, but I think on a campus like this, you already have the ability to all do this. You just have to figure out how to do it. And you can start in small groups. Before I go there, I want to do a little experiment. So I want to ask you all about a norm for this campus.
Oh.
No, let me say it.
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
So the question is this. Tell me if I get it right, Dave. What % of faculty on this campus have seen an incident of sexual harassment and done something about it? Is that the right thing to say? Okay, so write down on a piece of paper what you think.
I'd be curious, just above or below 50%.
Okay, what percent? How many of you think that more than 50% of faculty members who have seen an incident of sexual harassment have done something? And do you think that less than 50%? Let's just go by show of hands. We don't have to make a comment.
Can we clarify what
Yeah.
done something means?
What?
Can we clarify what done something
It's very
means?
subjective. Whatever you think is
Done
something.
something helpful or not?
Helpful to address the situation,
Okay.
not like freak out or.
Julie, I'm shocked that you would think that some of your faculty members could do something that was unhelpful.
Not faculty, people in general.
Okay, so the question is this. But this question is faculty. Raise your hand if you think that more than half of the faculty members who have seen an incident of sexual harassment have responded by doing something helpful. Raise your hand if you think more than half. Okay, now raise your hand if you think less than half. Okay, I turn it over to you, sir.
62, and that's like live right now.
Okay, so let's break this down. First of all, only 20% are noticing the event.
Yeah, there's a mess up with the question.
Okay.
I want to change the question.
Okay, but anyway, a lot of people should be noticing it who aren't. Okay, so we'll start with that. But of the ones who notice it, most are doing something, but we don't know what. So remember that poster about trash talk? Most boys don't like trash talk. We didn't ask them on the survey what they did. So we went and did focus groups and said, what do you do? What do you do? And then we put it on the posters. Here's what they do. So then you're building the basis for having a really cool poster saying, I have to think this through. So you might say something like, most faculty members who witness sexual harassment do something helpful. Here's what they say they do. And then you put a statistic like something like 63% of graduate students report being sexually harassed. It's happening. Take a look. Because you want to shape the message so that you're encouraging the people who don't see it to see it. And then we also want to talk to the people who see it and don't do something and find out what are the barriers. Because so right away you have like a whole year-long project just from that one statistic. Because you have people who are doing something, but we actually don't know if it's effective. We only know that they think it's effective. We have the people who are noticing it that aren't doing anything, who's in the 40% or 30% range. And we have the people who aren't noticing it, who are the majority. So right away, just from one statistic, that's great. So just to conclude, because there's been a certain amount of controversy about the social norms approach, which may or may not be known to you, but sometimes people's skepticism is reinforced by the questions in the literature, which in my opinion are mostly due to studies done with very poor methodology that couldn't be expected to work. Or like I said, you do a campus norms campaign on a campus that's so heterogeneous that no one feels there's a norm, and then it doesn't work, and then someone writes an article that says it doesn't work. So I did a presentation in 2012, and just out of curiosity, I did a survey of all the journals that publish peer-reviewed journals that publish research on social norms and what countries it was published in. And what you see is that this approach has really spread everywhere. Not only geographically, Journal of Urban Health, Journal of Occupational Health Psychology, Journal of Consumer Behavior, Journal of Scandinavian Studies in Criminology. So I think this approach is on very, very solid, academic grounds in general. And then we would say it's a proven practice for alcohol and it's an emerging best practice for violence. But I personally think that if you find that you have critics of this approach on your campus, or they read a peer-reviewed journal that said the results are equivocal, blah, 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 then it's possible to address that so that that doesn't stall you. But then you need to have the information, and I could help with that because there are common criticisms like when we first started talking about people in the 12-step world got really freaked out because they thought we were minimizing the problem by saying that most people don't drink or most people drink in a healthy way. And, if you're an alcoholic, you can't drink in a healthy way. So the first set of negative reactions came from people who were really committed to the 12-step model. And then we were able to help them see that we're actually helping you. Because first of all, we're creating a climate that's more supportive of people in recovery. Second of all, we're not denying the problem at all, we're just locating the problem. And we're not saying that this will work for people who have the problem to the point that they would get a diagnosis of alcoholism. Then there are these waves of criticisms that I won't go into here, but I feel that from an empirical point of view, it's a really well-established science-based practice that we can have faith in, that we could try. So any final questions or comments? A lot of this stuff is on my website because it had my name on it, but a lot of it is in other places. But there's like a lot of toolkits and manuals. There's a website, there's a National Center for Social Norms that is now at University of Michigan. No, I made a bad mistake, Michigan State. I've really put my foot in my mouth over that one at times, because in New York, where I went to college, we don't have like the two rivals that don't dare to be confused with the other. So anyway, they have a very good website. It's socialnorm.org, I think. So there's a lot of good resources if you want to go into this in more depth. Okay. I think most of you are done with me now, but some of you I think we have lunch. So thank you all very much. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very optimistic and enthusiastic by what you're doing. I am more aware the second time than the first of the challenges, but that's like, everyone has challenges. Just because I know you better, I know better what your challenges are. And as I said, I think the collaboration theme is really important to figure out how to collaborate without diminishing what anyone else is doing or taking away from their doing or interfering with what they're doing, to realize that there's many places on this campus where people are already doing really good things, and we need to know what all they're doing and how they're doing it and how they could sync what they're doing with each other. And if there's a group or department on campus that says it's doing something and you don't know what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it, that makes me nervous. Because we know that, like DARE, I'll use DARE as the example again, it's a very well-meaning effort, but it doesn't work. So just the fact that some groups on a campus are doing a lot of things and inviting in a lot of speakers and blah, 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 is not guaranteed that what they're doing is science-based and effective. And I think that as part of our university community, we are part of a community, even if it's a very diverse community like here with a lot of gaps, and that this initiative should require that all the different groupings that are doing something be accountable to talking with others who are doing it and sharing what they're doing. So you have orientation, you have residence life, you have athletics, you have Greek affairs within the student affairs side, and then you have all the pieces of the faculty puzzle. And then even if we can't get everyone on board, we'll get enough people on board that will create that tipping point. But I really feel everyone is accountable to each other, and no one gets to do their own thing without anyone else knowing what they're doing. And there's certain places, like in a campus like this, I haven't interacted with your athletic department, but it's traditional for the athletic department to do its own thing. Like when I worked at Hobart and William Smith, the men's gym was called Bristol Gym, so we used to call it Bristol College, right? Because it was really like a separate reality, but we need to create all the linkages. So thank you all very much, and hopefully I'll even get to see you again. And if you have any lingering questions, you always should feel free to email me or bring it to the task force.